Okay, welcome back to House Education, Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025. The Budget Adjustment Act is really one of the first pieces of legislation that goes through the House. This, as you probably have all heard, is really truing up the budget that we are currently in based on anticipated revenues and where expenditures are. This legislation resides with the House Appropriations Committee to begin with. We are asked to weigh in on certain pieces. Usually it's just money. Sometimes there's some policy language that we take advantage of because of the timing, which is what we saw this morning with the adult education program language that they proposed for that adult diploma, high school diploma program situation. But really for us, we sort of reside when it comes to the BAA within the education spending portion of that. So we're going to hear today sort of where the two budgets, I'm going to refer to them as, currently how they stand. Because we have got the education fund that funds the public school K-12 education system, which also gets sort of reevaluated and trued up, like did universal school meals really cost what was budgeted, that sort of thing. And then there's the operations of the Agency of Education, which is funded out of the general fund, not the education fund. And it also has ups and downs in terms of expenses and all that. So we've got two members of the AOE here to walk us through the numbers that are in the BAA over at the Agency of Education. It's a chance for us to kind of appropriation. It's a chance for us to sort of see what they are, ask questions, and if we feel modifications are in order, we can make recommendations to the Appropriations Committee. Turn it over to you. We've got Sean Kuzma, the Chief Financial Officer for AOE, and Jill Briggs-Campbell, Deputy Secretary of AOE. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, for the record, I'm Sean Kuzma, the interim CFO at AOE, and we have Jill on Zoom, our Deputy Secretary. I'm trying to share, and I don't know if I can. It's sharing something, no. Okay. I've got a slide deck prepared for all that, what Peter was talking about. All right. So yeah, we're going to go over the BAA. And we're going to talk about our current budget adjustment items. We've only got 3 this year. Licensing, peer review program, asking for a little more money there. The adult education program, and we've got a kind of a reduction in the ed spending. And then we're going to go into the FY24 carryover and reversions for general fund and ed fund. The peer review program, we're looking for an additional $75,000 to cover the increased number of folks going through the peer review program. So we budgeted for about 88 to go through this year, and we're looking more at 150. So we're looking for an increase there. And I referenced some information about the program. I think last year was the first year they put the moratorium on the fee that we normally charge for peer review program, and it's backfilled with general fund. And that's what we're requesting here, is a little more general fund to cover the fees we no longer collect. At least won't be for the next 5 years or so. Next, we have the adult ed and literacy program. Here we had a small increase in the number of students served. I think in FY24 we pay out on the average of the last 2 years, and so we're looking for another $506,000. And this program is broken into 2 different appropriations, 2 different funds. So it's split 60% general fund for $303,000 and 40% ed fund for $202,000. And the appropriations are in section 504 and 504.1. Happy to take questions if any come up.
This is the adult education literacy is confusing, I guess I could just say to all of you, what's proposed here is sort of what was intended under legislation passed last year.
Yeah. And next, we've got our adjusted education payment appropriation. We're looking at a reduction of $11 million, and it's broken out into two different pieces. We had a $3 million budget item to cover the EL categorical aid, which was new last year. In the end, when the budget was finalized, that was pulled out into its own appropriation, and this line was never reduced, so we kind of had this money in the budget twice, so this corrects that. And then our education spending grant, this is the big ed fund grant for the school districts. Our number was a little high when the final budgets finally were amended and passed, so we're reducing that line by $8 million to bring it down to the need for FY25.
Would it be fair to say that $8 million in the grant scheme of $2.3 billion is pretty close?
Yeah, yeah. And then another reduction here. We have we're not expecting to spend as much as we have in the budget for universal meals, so we're bringing that down 2.9 million down to the current estimate from our nutrition office.
Can you tell us what that current estimate is?
17.5, I believe.
So just want everybody to hear that, 17.5 million. We hear the number 30 tossed around a lot. That's sort of old news.
Yeah, and I think we're estimating 18.5 for next year. All right. Next, we'll go into the FY24 balances in general fund and ed fund. We either ask to carry over some funds or we'll revert some funds. And the next couple of slides, you'll see what we're asking for or revert.
Can I ask just a procedural clarification?
Sure.
Can you explain a little bit what carryover means and what reversion means?
Sure. Carryover, a lot of times we have grant obligations that hadn't been liquidated before the year ended, so we're still kind of on the hook for making those payments to the grantees. So we ask to carry that money so it doesn't affect our current year appropriations. And then if we don't need the funding or the administration says no to our carryover request, then the money gets reverted back to the general fund or ed fund to be used.
A carryover report is generally obligated.
Yes, or we have plans for it, and we ask for permission from the administration to spend the carryover that we didn't have obligated.
And then a reversion goes to the entire general fund, not the education portion of the general fund.
Yes, I believe so, because we will revert back general fund specifically, and then you'll see we'll be reverting back education fund money too. Okay. So the first couple of slides are general fund reversion or carryover / reversions. So our kind of our operating appropriations, finance, and then admin and education services. A small purchase order carryover in finance and administration, and then we had about 993,000 in general fund in our ed services program. 400,000 of that was obligated for grants and contracts, and then we have a couple things we want to do with the extra money that we got approval from the administration. They're listed there.
You say that we get approval from the administration.
Yeah.
You tend to refer to you all as the administration. So would you tell me a little bit more about that?
Finance and management. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So every year there's a carryover request that we do, I think for August 1st, where we detail all this information, and they'll say yes or no, and then eventually it gets into the budget adjustment. So they okayed the 893. They said no to $100,000, so that $100,000 gets reverted. these are our plans for the money. Moving on to more general fund, we've got the adult education literacy appropriation, a small balance there that's obligated on some grants. The flexible pathway appropriation, $509,000, and that's obligated for the spring semester of the dual enrollment program, and then a very small balance on the state board appropriation. That's obligated on contracts. All right, moving on to the ed fund. Again, in the finance and administration appropriation, we have $100,000 obligated. And that's to cover some costs on the SSDDMS project. We're reverting the balance of $301,000. Special ed, we've got grant obligations to carry over for $2.3 million. And then state placed, we're reverting a fairly large balance of $13.6 million.
That might require a little explanation.
Yeah. So I think over the years, we generally carry over the balance there and thinking we may need it for the current year. So we look back at our, how we've been spending those funds, and we're really not even spending as much as we receive each year in the current budget. So we feel we can live in the $20 million that's the FY25 budget for that line item this year. So we're reverting the balance as we don't anticipate needing it. So it goes back to the ed fund. So that's good news for whoever manages the overall ed fund. All right, back to the glasses. Ed spending grant, again, that's our large 2.whatever billion appropriation. Small balance we're reverting. That was left over from last year. We got a $593,000 reverting back in the small schools grant. That grant program ended last year, so we're giving back the balance. It was kind of replaced with a merger support grant program. But again, we're going to live with the current budget amount there. And then tech ed, we've got some grant obligations for $367,000, and we're reverting $1.8 million that was not needed for that year. All right. Moving on, flexible pathways appropriation. We've got a decent carryover for obligations and anticipated FY25 increases. I believe, I want to say it's early college increases and the students taking advantage of that program. And then we're reverting the $1.3 million.
Does that mean that we have in that area basically $3 million? And what you're saying is that really only 1.78 was used?
No, 1.8 is, some of that's obligated.
Yeah.
So it was, granted out last year, and then the rest is we're hanging on to for anticipated increases in the current year.
It sounds like, but then we have 1.3 of sort of overestimating what it would be costing.
Yeah. It's flexible pathways is made up of several programs,
right.
So they accumulate to that balance, I guess. Universal meals, here's $6.2 million that we had more than we needed last year. So as we said earlier, we're reducing the current year appropriation also, so we certainly don't need this money to cover that program. And then lastly, we got the PCB remediation. This is some one-time money, $16.3 million, that we're continuing that program this year in FY25.
We might need a little more on that as well.
Okay.
Just to understand how much of that current 16.3 is in fact already obligated, just not paid out yet, as opposed to might be needed later.
Yeah, I believe, and Jill can chime in if she wants to. It's all going to go.
Knows to ask the questions.
Yeah, it's all going to go this year. We've even gotten, I think, $4.5 million more transferred from another agency to help continue the program and cover, I guess, whatever's happening this year. Any more you want to add, Jeff?
Yeah, so I would consider that 16.2 million in essence fully obligated through grant awards, including the large portion of that was for Burlington High School. So obligated meaning we've made a grant award, right? The money is no longer available. We've promised it, and then the schools will seek reimbursement once they have paid their invoices. So to Sean's point, I would consider that money obligated and no longer available. And then in addition, to cover some of the PCB remediation costs that cropped up over the past few months, the Department of Environmental Conservation, which is under Agency of Natural Resources, has a rolling federal fund. They were able to do an MOU between our two agencies to continue to make funds available to address those remediation costs, specifically the costs that came up related to North Country. And then we also do have, other remaining costs for schools.
And fair to say that with that additional $4 million, that's also all fully obligated.
It's on its way to being fully obligated, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So if we want to kind of go back, Peter, back in time for folks that are new in the room, there was $32 million in education fund that was appropriated by the legislature for the PCB program. At this point, all of those funds have been obligated and most of them have been reimbursed.
Thank you.
Peter, can I just?
Yes, I think we're ready for questions.
Yes.
Thank you. The flexible pathway is the 1.3. You just mentioned it, as we know, there's several different segments of that program. So it would be interesting to know whether it was all in one or how it was spread out amongst the programs, just to get a sense of where
Where
uptake of the programs.
I think the big one here, was, I should have looked at my notes, the high school completion program.
Okay.
So I think that one ended up with a large balance, and that program ended last year. So where we normally may carry over money to
Got it.
continue that, if you need to.
Got it.
I could get you actual numbers.
Actually, that helped a lot, just
Okay.
to understand. I don't know if anybody else wants to know more, but I get that. Thank you.
Sure.
In the general fund part of the budget, where would we see reflection of vacancies at the agency? Like, it looks like from the directory we got earlier this year, there's from Mike, at least 22 vacancies.
Yeah.
Are those being held as carryover, actively pursuing to fill those positions? Has that money already been reverted? Where would we, or how would we see that reflected here and what's happening?
Yeah, well, I think we budget roughly $500,000 less in general fund than we need to cover all of our positions that are funded with general fund. So we, the budget process forces us to anticipate vacancies. So we short ourselves a certain percentage. So that's kind of already built in. So for ending the year, last year, we probably, some of that 893,000 may have been still more vacancy savings that we had because we had such a large number of vacancies. So we've asked for permission to spend that differently. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
So on slide 8,
Yeah.
it's the section B 501, education services. Is that the number you're talking about? No.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's now being used for sub-grants and contracts?
Well, that was always going to be used for sub-grant. It's
Okay.
the difference that we got permission to spend differently, I would say.
This may be talking about vacancy savings. So what you're saying is that you recognize that vacancies are a reality, and
Yep.
you budget with a certain number of vacancies felt to be kind of always there.
Yeah, it's like 5% of the general fund positions. We short the amount by 5%, and that accumulates to about 500,000, if I'm remembering correctly.
Is that, do you know, I'm not sure I'm totally understanding it, but then do you know if that, in the carryover, the obligated subgrants and contracts, is that largely APA consulting contracts from CTE and Listen and Learn?
I can respond to that.
So I want to.
The funding for APA and for new solutions, which is another consulting group that's been providing timely sort of on-the-ground budget support for districts. We actually leveraged the last of our kind of ESSER state level funds and then did a liquidation extension. So we were really maximizing federal dollars to pay for those consultants.
All right, so I think we're just everybody is ready to work looking at section B501, the $893,000 carryover. Just how that works, talks about vacancy savings and all of that. Carryover means it's obligated,
Yes.
but not necessarily obligated to the potential hiring of vacancies.
Correct, no. That would be in our current year budget already, so, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so just, I know state hiring practices across state government can be a little bit quirky to folks, but is budgeting for that level of vacancy savings a standard across Vermont state government, or is that particular to the Agency of Education?
I think all agencies and departments have some sort of vacancy savings factor that they have to build in. We didn't adjust ours, I think, up or down this year because we have so many vacancies, but hopefully we're gonna fill them. And, by 26, we won't have so many, but.
Do you have a sense of how many years that's been kind of the standard practice, just if you know?
Ever since I've been doing budgets with the agency, which goes back to the early 2000s.
Yes.
Just a quick follow-up on the obligated sub-grants and contracts, sort of following up. Can you just give me a description of what those sub-grants and, in general, and contracts would be?
So, let's see.
I mean, maybe Jill has better stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Governors Institute comes to mind. That's a general funded contract, so, or grant. So if they don't request everything they're granted, we'd hang on to it, hopefully get approval and send it to them when they requested it, after the fiscal year ended. Yeah, I didn't dig into those numbers for today. And then I don't have examples of the contracts. It's just a contract that's funded with general fund, coming out of the education services team. I'd have to get back to you for
Okay, that'd be great.
real examples. Okay.
Yeah, I would appreciate
Yeah.
that. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any further questions? So just in terms of our role here, I'll be sending a letter to appropriations, commenting or not on this, as well as like the language we heard this morning. In general, we've never really said much about these because they are not substantive. But I just want to make sure everybody had their questions answered. Great. John, thank you.
Great. Thank
Jill,
you.
thank you. We're gonna, we don't need to reset, do we, because we're on the same topic?
I'm not sure if our next witness is ready.
No. All right.
So are we ready to go offline?
Sure.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Is, hold for just 2 minutes. Just give ourselves here. Okay. Any further questions on that? It's a little bit technical for sure, but it is just a true up of the budgets. So it was important to ask about these vacancies and where that saved money came from those. If you would like to-
Actually, I figured it out. Actually, I want to hear from you.
Okay, so we got another quick 15 minutes on one more issue in the EAA. Later, I'll be issuing our position, which will essentially be neutral on that stuff, proposing the language that we heard this morning about the high school completion program, and then whatever else we develop from the following testimony. So yeah, anytime. But God, I gave you so many topics, or we're gonna get a big, we need a lot of brain space for later today.
We're through.
We need a challenge.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, you are going live. And you are live.
Okay, welcome back. We're continuing our discussion on the Budget Adjustment Act. We have one more short amount of testimony on that from Hunger Free Vermont. We have Keely Aiken from Hunger Free Vermont to give us an update on, I assume, universal school meals and anything else, I guess. The floor is yours. Go right ahead. And welcome to the House Education Committee.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Are you able to hear me all right?
Perfectly. Thank you.
Perfect. Yes, thank you. My name is Keely Aiken, and I am the Early Childhood Nutrition Manager at Hunger Free Vermont. And I'm actually here today to talk about an opportunity for the Child and Adult Care Food Program. Although universal school meals is a hot topic, and I'm happy to direct any questions to my colleagues about that. So thank you so much for the opportunity to testify to the committee about appropriating funds to the Child and Adult Care Food Program, or CACFP sponsor organizations in Vermont. So Let's Grow Kids submitted a memo to your committee outlining their concerns about the administration's proposals to sweep $26 million in total funding from the general fund and the Child Care Contributions Special Fund. They, at Let's Grow Kids, have recommended to the Appropriations Committee that the funding be preserved for childcare purposes, which we agree with at Hunger Free Vermont. Let's Grow Kids also provided the Appropriations Committee with a list of funding opportunities to strengthen Act 76, which is the 2023 Child Care Bill, and I'm here to discuss one of the potential uses of funding that they have identified. Hunger Free Vermont is specifically supportive of the Let's Grow Kids recommendation to appropriate $182,000 to the Agency of Education to distribute among the Child and Adult Care Food Program sponsor organizations here in Vermont as an incentive to participate as a sponsor organization. Family child care homes in Vermont, which make up a really incredible portion of child care programs in the state, are not able to participate in the CACFP, the Federal Child Food Program, without a CACFP sponsor. And we are asking the House Education Committee to include this request in your budget adjustment memo. The CACFP is the most equitable way to provide nutritious meals and snacks in early childhood education settings because all children receive the same developmentally appropriate nutrition. When an early childhood education program relies on families to pack meals and snacks, different families have different capacities, and therefore some children may be accessing more nutritious meals than others and are therefore able to access better learning. In order to participate in the CACFP, like I said before, those family child care homes are required to work with a CACFP sponsor organization. In Vermont, those organizations are typically a community action organization or a parent-child center. Without CACFP sponsor organizations, family child care homes who serve over 3,500 children in Vermont are not eligible for the child and adult care food program. In 2024, Vermont went from having 5 CACFP sponsoring organizations to only 3 CACFP sponsoring organizations. 2 of those organizations dropped in 2024 because of the financial and capacity burden of being a CACFP sponsor organization. The 3 CACFP sponsor organizations in Vermont currently are Brock Community Action Agency, Capstone Community Action, and the Winston Prouty Center for Child and Family Development. These 3 organizations are responsible for admitting the CACFP to family child care homes across the entire state. And at this time, the administrative payments that they receive from the federal government for participating in the program do not adequately cover the cost of being a sponsoring organization. On top of administrative funding challenges, now organizations are struggling to manage capacity as they have to physically cover larger portions of the state as well, since there are only 3 of them. Sponsors have to visit participating family child care homes several times a year as per the federal guidelines of the child nutrition program, making the capacity challenge even more difficult. Thank you again for your consideration of our request to appropriate $182,000 to the Agency of Education to distribute among the child and adult care food program sponsor organizations as an incentive to participate as a sponsor of the CACFP for family child care home providers. Without CACFP sponsors, many children in Vermont would not be able to access nutrition in their early childhood education programs. You can have the most qualified program directors and early childhood educators, but if children are showing up hungry or not showing up because they're hungry, they're not able to access learning and development. Please recommend to the Appropriations Committee that they use the available general funds for childcare to support this important program that helps small home-based family childcare programs and helps ensure that children have access to nutritious meals. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm going to try to restate what you said, and you can correct me where I'm wrong.
Amazing.
This program largely is taken up by home providers, and that the idea here is to broaden the sponsoring organizations to include the Agency of Education, and that the money would generally be flowing to home child care providers. Is that pretty accurate?
The mechanism is, so the way that the federal program works, the Agency of Education is the state sponsor of the food program, but there have to be sponsoring organizations that administer the program at the family child care home level. So the money has to flow through the Agency of Education, but it would go to these sponsoring organizations, because without sponsoring organizations, the family child care homes can't even participate if they don't have a sponsoring organization. So that's where the money would flow.
Thank you. So the Agency of Education really doesn't have much to do with child care, especially home care.
Yeah, the Agency of Education is the sponsor for center-based programs, and then the sponsoring organizations are for those family child care homes.
Is that you said that's the way it currently works, or that's what you're proposing?
That's the way it currently works.
Okay, all right. So, all right, interesting.
Yes, it is.
We're going to get a little more information on this to learn a little bit more. It's a question over here.
Yeah, I'm struggling to follow all of it. Does it essentially mean that if we don't have this funding to be able to flow to these sponsoring organizations, we've got centers and programs throughout the state that would lose some federal funding. And we're going to be accessing fewer federal dollars for food programs?
That's absolutely a part of it. And at the base level, if we don't have sponsoring organizations, or if we don't have enough sponsoring organizations, the family child care homes aren't even eligible to serve meals. So they can't access those federal dollars or that federal meal program.
So this is at its heart a home childcare issue. In other words,
Yes.
childcare centers have the capacity to get the funding they need through the Agency of Education.
Yes.
Previously to this request, homes, there are just fewer agencies to funnel that money to home childcare settings. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. 2 programs dropped. We only had 5, which was still a big struggle. And then 2 programs had to drop the sponsoring responsibilities last year because the funding that they were receiving didn't cover the cost for them.
You pointed out some of the responsibilities that go with this money, such as visiting the child care homes. Who then would be responsible for that?
It would be the sponsoring organizations, and hopefully our intention is that we are able to enroll more sponsoring organizations in the future, so that they don't have to cover as big of a geographic space as they're having to do now with only 3 of them statewide.
That responsibility would not fall upon the Agency of Education.
No.
Okay, this may be something that's a little, even though the number is pretty small, this may be something a little complicated for us to meet our deadline. However, the BAA obviously goes through a long, circuitous process, and there'll be other opportunities. But we'll give it some thought. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we have a handout resource, and we're also always available for any questions if anyone's ever interested in learning more. It's those federal programs, they're very complicated.
Yeah, sure are. Great. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Why don't we break for 5 minutes while we squeeze some more chairs in?
Okay.
And we'll be here ready to start at 2 with our colleagues from the Senate.